going to work.
It's going to work. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the McFarland Public Library. And we're very honored to have Lon Haldeman with us today. I kind of consider him the Forrest Gump of bicycling because, it's pretty amazing. We have in the back some books of his that you can purchase. He also brought some of his posters and stuff that you can have for free. And we also have a copy of his book at the library. So afterwards, if you wanted to check it out, you would be the first one after us to do that. So, Lon, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Well, one of the two questions people always ask is, why did you ride across the country, and why did you write a book? Well, riding across the country and going back all the way, Thomas Stevens in 1884 rode a high-wheeler across the country from San Francisco back towards New York to the East Coast. Took him over 100 days. And back in 1884, they had completed a railroad. And of course, there was the Oregon Trail, Wagon Road, and remnants of the Pony Express route. So he rode a combination of all those, but he ended up pushing his bike about a third of the time. This is, with a high-wheeler bike, and took him over 100 days. He did it just to finish. He eventually stayed in New York for a few months, went to London, eventually rode around the world, then wrote a book about it. George Nellis in 1887 decided he would try to ride across the country too, but he wanted to try to break the record of 105 days. So George Nellis started in New York State. He actually wasn't on the East Coast. He was kind of inland, closer to Albany, New York. And so he started, but he was a little more focused. So he wanted to get his 50 miles in every day across the country. Eventually, George Nellis rode across in around 75 days. So cross-country riding has been going on for a long time. Now, over the years, about every 10 years, somebody would do it faster. People were starting to ride bikes more and more. Eventually, from a high-wheeler penny farthing bike, they became bikes with wheels the same size, a safety bike, what they were called. A lot of them, no derailleurs, just one gear, one fixed gear, very crude brakes. But at least they were safer and they were a little bit faster. So eventually that cross-country record, got down to 50 days, and it took a long time for anybody to even get down close to 30 days. It was probably in the 1940s before somebody finally did it around 30 days. So I'd been fascinated by riding a bike. I liked riding my bike. I liked the physical activity. I played sports in high school, so I liked that. And I also liked going places. So for me, it was really natural to say, oh yeah, I want to try to ride my bike someplace far. And so when I was an 8-year-old kid, I would ride across town 10 blocks, and I thought that was a long way. And ride to school, which I thought was a long way. Eventually went out, started riding to some towns 3 miles away, and then 5 miles a day, and making loops and things. And I guess I think back on it, my parents really, they let me go everywhere. I would leave on my bike and I'd be gone. And so going 20 miles a day, 30 miles a day, and I had this little odometer. I don't know if you guys remember the old speedometer with the little clicker on the spoke, ding, 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 to go around and measure your, so I was really fascinated with trying to document how far I'd ride. So for me, it was a very gradual progression all the way from being 8 years old, all the way to 12 years old, and so on, as I got involved in longer and longer rides, and eventually cross-country racing, and eventually riding 100 times on various events across the country. Well, then about writing a book, my mother and father had been involved with us on a lot of rides, and they kept saying, why don't you write a book? You've got a bunch of experiences. And finally, my dad passed away in 1985, when he was 85, about 8 years ago. And my mom said, you gotta finish that book. So anyway, so the last 8 years, I've been pretty much, getting the book finished. And a lot of the stories and things I had documented earlier on various magazine articles and things. And the double transcontinental ended up being kind of the theme of the book. And then I attached a lot of stories about the double transcontinental and then other cycling events. And the double transcontinental was kind of before video and stuff, so we don't have any good movies of that. But there was a lot of newspaper articles. That's when everybody had a daily newspaper or a weekly newspaper. And so lots of articles and things. So I was able to kind of reconstruct a lot about that double transcontinental. And so that's what eventually led to writing the book and then a lot of the stories that went along with it. So I'm gonna read a few excerpts from the book. I don't think we have time to go, of course, not read the whole book, but I'm going to try to stay to the topic here and give you a flavor of some of the things that were in the book. And it starts off, whenever I get the feeling of wanting to see the world and call the open road, I get on my bike and ride. The story is based on the facts as I best can remember, thinking back to over 40 years ago. My memory is so clear about some of the details, I can hear the crunch of the gravel beneath my tires and the smell of the desert. Some things get so burned into your brain, it's easy to recall them without really thinking. Years later, when talking to my mom and dad about cross-country cycling memories, their memories of New York, Wichita, Albuquerque, and Flagstaff, Arizona, I hear them describe the mental pictures they retained of the double transcontinental ride of 1981. That is the way it was for this trip across the country. Part race, part tour, part athletic, and 100% adventure. Webster defines adventure as proceeding into the unknown without planning. Actually, we did a lot of planning, but we were always, well, I'll keep that to wake it up. We were always surprised when things weren't as planned. This book is a collection of coincidences that happened to me in the past 50 years. Maybe a more descriptive title of the book should have been The Unintentional Cycling Pioneer. A lot of things happen by being in the right place at the right time or making a positive experience out of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I write some of this story in the first person in the moment that the ride was happening in 1981. I write some of this with the knowledge of the future and knowing what happened during 100 other cross-country cycling events. I tell this story in the light of knowing the ending and how it changed my life during the past 50 years. It's a story I'm telling differently now if I hadn't had time to reflect on how the double transcontinental record at the time should have failed a dozen times. There were so many things with friends, crew members, sponsors, and good luck that worked. Looking back after a career of organizing cross-country events, I would have given the double transcontinental record about a 10% chance of being successful. Let me tell you about the summer of 1981. Now, during the book here, I skip around. I'm not going to read everything here, but so anyway, the book is kind of a collection of a lot of things that were happening when I was just getting into riding and how I got interested. And I had the junkiest bikes. I had no money, no good bikes. Everything was just kind of a hodgepodge. And so anyway, at the pace I would need to maintain for my double transcontinental feat, physiologists calculated the effort being equivalent to doing a full Ironman triathlon every day. In simpler terms, it'd be similar to climbing 102 flights of stairs to the top of the Empire State Building 40 times per day. That's about 4,000 flights in Fitbit terms. My riding would not be totally mindless plodding mile after mile. I would need to be dealing with changeable weather, road conditions, navigation, and other logistical challenges. The record attempt effort was similar to a marathon runner climbing a slippery, muddy slope nonstop for a month. Since I had never done an Ironman triathlon, run a marathon, or been to the Empire State Building, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. In 1953, Edmund Hillary became the first person to climb the 29,000-foot elevation of Mount Everest. It was considered humanly impossible at the time. 40 years later, with improvements in equipment, preparation, and climbing techniques, there are now hundreds of climbers making the ascent every year. Riding a bicycle nonstop across the United States is probably closer to the mentality and preparation needed for mountain climbing. Some people say mountain climbing is not really a sport. compared to football or baseball. Some people say riding a bike across the country is not really a sport compared to traditional bicycle racing such as the Tour de France. Both these comparisons are true. Riding a bicycle across the United States fast and mountain climbing take their own unique skills and motivation. Each sport takes tremendous skill at an elite level. Professional basketball player Larry Bird once said that anyone who's tried to make a 30-foot basket in their driveway can relate to how difficult it was during a real game. The same could be said for anyone who has ridden a bicycle 10 miles, can relate to how difficult it is to ride over 350 miles every day nonstop for a week. I hope after reading this book you will have a better understanding of the unique sport of cross-country riding. So when I was a 12-year-old, there were a bunch of riders from Rockford that came into my little town, Harvard, Illinois, and they had skinny tires, they had black shorts, they had cleats on the bottom of the shoes. This is back when you used to nail the cleats on your shoes. And so I talked to them. I said, oh, that's really neat. So they explained to me all the advantages of their equipment and stuff. So I went home. I took my Sunday school pants, black pants. I cut them off. I made myself some cycling shorts. I took some sheet metal, traced out my insoles, and I cut the sheet metal out and put it in my gym shoes to make cycling shoes with stiffer soles. And so that's kind of how I was hodgepodging everything together. My grandpa had found an old Raleigh Hercules bike in the dumpster, didn't have shift cables, brake cables or anything. And I would shift it by, you pedal the gears and move the rear derailleur, and then I'd put a different size rock or stick in the parallelogram there to hold it to the right gear. And if I got to a hill, I'd have to get off and move the derailleur and shift to another gear and so on. And I had to whittle some brake shoes out of wood and put in there. And so I had really, really bad equipment, but I didn't know any better. I thought that's just the way you had to do it. So that's what I wrote. And I started mowing lawns, $3 a lawn, mowing the lawn. And I'd upgrade my bike. Eventually I got a bike from the Ace Hardware store for $69 in a box. They said it'd be cheaper if I put it together myself instead of paying $89 to have it assembled, so I did it myself. And so that's kind of how I got involved in the sport of riding. And so I would still go out and ride, my 30-mile loop every now and then. And I thought, oh yeah, that's really far. I think it took me until several summers before I finally did a 60-mile ride and then eventually a 100-mile ride. So I kept riding throughout high school, and when I graduated from high school, I talked to my parents. I said, I'm going to go to McHenry County College. It's 30 miles away. I can ride my bike every day and save a lot on gas. And they said, oh man, that's $345. That's too much for a bike. And I said, no, I'll save it in gas. And so anyways, that's what I started doing. I started riding back and forth 60 miles a day to McHenry County College. And so I started getting in pretty good shape. You're doing that every day. And then on the weekend, I'd go off and ride a double century or something like that. So I started to put in quite a few miles. And so one of the things here, I'll read you. On the recommendation of my high school industrial arts teacher, I went for a job interview as a draftsman at a local manufacturing plant. The manager liked my drafting work and wondered when I could start at the factory. I told him about how many miles and hours I needed for my cycling training schedule. It didn't leave a lot of extra time for going to work. I didn't realize that was not something to say at a job interview, but I knew my training had to be a priority. I didn't get the job, but the factory manager became one of my main sponsors during future events. So, I look back at some of the things I was doing. I was kind of nuts, I guess, because I got did my driver's ed, and I was supposed to go get a driver's license. Well, I didn't go to the DMV and get it. And they finally said, if you don't do this, like within a year, you got to do driver's ed all over again. So eventually went down to the DMV and got my driver's license. But I was doing everything on a bike. Well, I was also doing a lot of research about cross-country riding, and various people had ridden across the country, and the Kowali brothers had, actually even before then, 18 days. Peter Duker, a guy from England rode across the country in the late 60s and did an 18-day transcontinental, and he had a taxi as his support vehicle. They were sponsors. So he did it like an 18-day record. Then the Kowali brothers from Minnesota came along and did it in 14 days. Two guys riding together, slept all night, ate at restaurants, 200 miles a day. You know, I'm reading all this stuff in Vela News, Bicycling Magazine, Bike World, and I had this whole collection of scrapbooks and stuff, and I'd cut all the articles out and do the research on diets and anything I could find. Well, and John Marino came along in 1978 and did it in 13 days, and he got a lot of notoriety. Maybe some people even remember John Marino. You know, 1978. You know, it was on the cover of Bicycling Magazine. So, you know, I said, oh man, that's something I really want to do. So you know, they say it takes like 10,000 hours to master something. And so that's kind of where I was. I was doing my 10,000 hours of training. You know, it's a couple of thousand miles every year. And I was just fascinated with doing long rides and going places. And so anyway, one of the crazier things I did, I went up to northern Wisconsin, the peninsula there by Red Cliff, that's up in the Lake Superior, and drove up there with a friend in his van. We get up there after midnight, slept on the ground, got up at 5 in the morning, started riding back down. I had a one-speed bike, 14 gear, and I rode all the way back down to Bigfoot, Illinois, on the Wisconsin border in 23 hours and 7 minutes. And I was, you know, fascinated with riding point to point, and that was the second 400-mile event I had done that summer. Well, I was working in a bike shop, and I started riding even further. I had a different bike shop that I was working at down in Elgin, Illinois. So it was 90 to 100 miles every day. I'm riding back and forth, plus on Sunday, I'm going off and doing a double or triple century. So I'm hitting 600-700 miles a week. You know, I seem like I had to think, how many 100-mile days in a row could I do? I didn't want to break that streak. So I had like ridden almost all summer, nothing under 100 miles. And so I did an event down in Missouri called Bicycle Across Missouri, and it was going to be 540 miles nonstop from St. Louis to Kansas City and back. And while I'm down there at the start, and we're at a Denny's restaurant, it's dark in the morning, and there's about 30 riders, and there was one woman there, and I think, she's, you know, why is a woman going to go out and ride this? You know, it's pretty hard. And so anyway, we did the ride. It turned out it was kind of like a race, really, but did it, came back. I was the first one to finish, and in about 33 hours. And then about a month later, they sent us a roster, all the finishers out of the 30-some starters and about 16 finishers, but this woman had finished. And her name was Susan Odoranzo, but I couldn't spell it. I mean, I couldn't pronounce it at the time. And so I wrote her a letter, because there was an address in this little biography about everybody. And I said, oh, yeah, do you want to, I'm going to do this transcontinental record. You know, would you want to help? And she goes, oh, that would be really fun to be on your crew. So anyway, so I started to, I did 540 miles, which was my longest event at the time. And so a month after BAM, the organizer sent us a list of the results and contact information for each rider. Less than half the entrants had finished. The last rider to finish before the 60-yard cutoff time was a woman, the same woman I'd seen at Denny's restaurant before the ride. Her name was Susan, and her last name was spelled Notorangelo, but I couldn't pronounce it. I decided to write her a letter and ask why she decided to ride an event as difficult as BAM. I told her I was planning to try to break the transcontinental record the following year, and I was interested in what motivated her to set goals. When Susan received my letter, she showed it to her boyfriend, who was an avid cyclist. He encouraged Susan to ask me about joining the crew for the record attempt. During the next few months, we exchanged long letters and even had some phone calls about getting ready for the transcontinental ride. I still hadn't met Susan in person, but she said she had time off during the summer of 1981 to go on the whole record attempt. I think she impressed her parents when she said she was going to help a PhD student who went to Harvard. What she didn't tell her parents is that I went to Harvard High School and that I was a PhD student and the PH was mostly silent. So I was still riding a lot, and then I started doing these other multi-day events where I'd ride 300 miles down to southern Illinois, do a 300-mile race the next day, and then ride back 310 miles the next day. So those were all good training rides to get ready for the transcontinental. Now, I have to credit a lot my parents. Weren't really cyclists until I got into cycling. People think that they got me interested in cycling. Actually, it's probably the other way around. They thought I was always a little nuts too. And so it was after high school, more or less, that they started riding. They actually did a perimeter Wisconsin trip from Illinois to Iowa to Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, Michigan, and then back around. They did over 1,000 miles on their tandem. And I also had the double, getting ready for the double transcontinental. Well, when it started, it really wasn't the double transcontinental. It was all about doing the transcontinental and trying to break Marino's record. So really how that all came about was one night in January, I was riding on my rollers in the basement like I did every night throughout the winter. My dad came in the room and was telling me about some of the correspondence he had received from various bike clubs across the country. Without much thought, I said, it's been so much work to put a route together, why don't we ride both ways for the double transcontinental record? We can ride from New York to California first and try to make Marino's record on the return trip. That's how we decided to try to break the double transcontinental record. Instantly, all the logistics except the routing have doubled. More expenses, more time away from work, more effort riding the bike. We talked about it another 5 minutes and then decided, why not? So that's kind of how the decision was made. So then we started this promotion of trying to get it together. I was going to start my double transcontinental attempt by riding from east to west. If I didn't break the one-way record heading to California, I was hoping to go faster on the return trip to New York. Either way, I had to finish in under 36 days to break Victor Vincenti's round-trip record, which was set, round-trip record of 36 days, that was set in 1974. These were the pioneering days of long-distance cycling. Everything we learned was by trial and error, and the learning curve was pretty steep because we had many failures. So this is kind of a route going from New York down, and then we get to Los Angeles and turn around and come back. So here I am at 3 a.m. in New York City Hall, Saturday night, Sunday morning, because that's when we figured the traffic would be the least. And if you look closer on the light on my handlebars, it's a camping flashlight. And that's what kind of lights you had back then. Either you had Wonder Lights, which you remember Wonder Lights, they put a little yellow spot about 10 feet in front of your bike. It's about all you had. So anyway, I had this light. So I'm going through Harlem, and all I know about Harlem is there's a rose in Spanish Harlem, a song, and I'm singing this song. I hit a manhole cover. The lens pops off the flashlight, the batteries fall out, the car behind me crunches everything, and so now, and then we get to the Verrazano Bridge, and it's big expansion joint. It's just like the Golden Gate Bridge, over going into New Jersey. And the support car says, we'll see you on the other side. You got to walk on the sidewalk. So I have to get off, walk in the sidewalk in the dark. It's a long bridge. It's like half an hour walking across this bridge and get to the other side. And so that's kind of how things went. And we went across little by little. We were learning a lot every day. I thought 200 miles was going to be a long day. Well, I had to average close to 240 miles, to break the record. So we headed across Pennsylvania, into Ohio, into Indiana, into Illinois, into Missouri, working my way across the country. And again, we're learning a lot as we went eventually into Kansas. The headwinds start to blow, and we're heading down towards the Panhandle. Wind is just howling, 30-mile-an-hour headwinds. My other one of the mechanics, he would get out to ride with me, and he's in his blue jeans and his baseball hat riding along on one of my spare bikes, and the cattle trucks would blow by us. His hat would blow off and blow in the ditch. He didn't have a helmet. I had a skidlet helmet to keep my hat on. But anyway, during one 24-hour period, I only rode 180 miles, and I was on the bike a lot. I was barely going 10 miles an hour, and this is kind of what the road looked like. And there's a grain elevator about every 11 miles. They spaced them out because they used to be the water stops for the train, and that's about how far the train would go before it needed more water and things. And so at night, you would see the beacon way up ahead. It would take me over an hour to get to the next town. I'd ride through the town, out the other side, see another grain elevator, and eventually all the way down into New Mexico. And I had no idea. I didn't really have a good feel for the geography. I thought once you got to the Continental Divide in New Mexico, you could see the ocean. And it's like 750 miles yet to go. So, but anyway, every hill, I'm like, look, stand up. I said, can I see the ocean here? Can I see the ocean? I forgot there was Arizona was in the middle there. I had 350 miles of Arizona to go.
In this area, the Oak Creek is really hilly.
Right.
Oak Creek is
Right,
really
right.
hilly.
Well, we were going south, and on the return trip, we didn't go that way. We came back up through Ash Fork. That's explained in the book why we made that detour to catch the tailwinds, except it meant another 45 miles of ride on the interstate. But yeah, that's hard riding through there. And then heading down into the desert, and I'd never been in the desert like that, and dust devils are blowing in the sand and stuff. And I remember it was so hot, if you rode with your mouth open, your tongue stuck to the roof of your mouth. So you had to keep your mouth shut, and they kept feeding me these peanut butter sandwiches. I can't eat a peanut butter sandwich. I can, So anyway, but my main diet was Archway cookies and bananas. And we had to pack in enough calories. And at the time, 300 calories an hour we thought was going to be enough. Well, mathematically, technically, scientifically, it is not enough. But that's one of the things we were learning. And then Carnation Instant Breakfast, if you remember that, we started to drink that as a way to pack in more calories because you couldn't get enough calories just by eating.
Is that the diet that they were recommending at the time?
The diet?
Yeah, like what you're.
There was no
You
recommended
said
diet.
there was some research.
They said eat spaghetti. This is, the carbo loading, eat spaghetti. Well, you can't eat spaghetti on the bike 10 days in a row and stuff. So, yeah, that's why things were really, really crude. So, the Carnation Instant Breakfast really wasn't a bad idea. It was at least calories to get in there. And in the book, I explain that a lot more, but I'll tell a quick story. Eventually, in 1987, when I did the double transcontinental with Pete, or the tandem ride with Pete Penseers, we did all kinds of physical testing. Now, that would have been about my 10th race across the country at that time, by 1987. So I had a pretty good idea of the route, had learned a lot about nutrition and everything. But we had scientists documenting everything and testing us beforehand and all this stuff. And I needed to put in 500 calories an hour, which is a lot, trying to eat that much every hour. And so we ended up with this other liquid diet that was developed for cancer people. I guess they took it, they must have put a feeding tube down their mouth because it tasted so bad. And so eventually they put enough chocolate in it so you could finally choke it down. But the good thing was it was really good for you. And I got to be superstitious after training on this diet for months and months. And so during that tandem transcontinental ride, I was putting in 12,000 calories a day, day after day, and I still felt great after 4 or 5 days, which is normally, by that time, you're just riding on fumes and, you know, you have no glycogen left in your body and you're just kind of half power. So, but yeah, we learned a lot, you know, over those 10 years. Like because every time I did a transcontinental ride, I was 12 hours faster. And a lot of it was just knowing the nutrition and then also the motivation. So eventually I'm heading into California, and I don't know if you've ever gone Interstate 10 at night, but you come down Chiracco Summit, you're at about over 3,000 feet, and you look down, sea of lights down below. I go, oh, I'm almost to Los Angeles. Well, that was Palm Springs, and I'm still 150 miles to go. So you come down into Palm Springs, and then he said, no, you still got 150 miles to go tomorrow. So I had to get up, ride then over another 2,500 foot ridge, and then eventually down into Los Angeles. You know, Route 66 at the time was decertified and stuff, and it took forever. There's 360 traffic lights in 100 miles. It took forever. And I eventually make it down to the beach in 12 days, 18 hours. Did not break Marino's record. So we knew, though, I couldn't really celebrate. And this picture was actually taken after the fact. This was not at the time because I didn't look that good. When I'm at the city hall, this fellow, the hippie guy, that's Victor Vincente. He's the guy that had the double transcontinental record. And he came down from Santa Barbara to meet me. So I was able to talk to him for a while. But our crew, we weren't celebrating at all. We were like, we got to get back on the bike in about 4 hours. So let's get to bed. Let's get some pizza. Get to bed. We're getting out of here because we have to leave again in the dark because we don't want to go through those 360 traffic lights during rush hour traffic. So we got back on the bike in the early morning hours and got out of Los Angeles. So now I'm heading back east, and I'm, you know, mentally I'm feeling, yeah, at least we're counting it down. You know, now I knew the route from the day before, and we had only been lost twice on the way going west. On the way back, we wouldn't get lost at all. Mainly because we knew the route. I'm always like, I'm hoping we pick up some of those tailwinds and things, but turned out we didn't. But so we started counting down the days, and now I'm going a little bit faster. You know, the winds were somewhat favorable, but I was starting to knock off. I think this first day going back east, I rode almost 300 miles, which was one of the longest days of the trip. And then heading back up into Flagstaff, we went a different way up to Oak Creek Canyon, around Oak Creek Canyon, we back up to Flagstaff, up the 500 mile mark. And the next morning, Flagstaff's around 7,000 feet, and then you come on down towards New Mexico. But so when I departed Flagstaff the next morning, the air was crisp and cold at 7,000 feet. There's a gradual downhill the next 50 miles towards Winslow, Arizona, dropping about 2,000 feet. The downhill and slight tailwind made me feel strong this morning. My only concern was an annoying saddle sore developing on my left side. I coasted down the grade while standing up on my pedals. I put my hand down my shorts and pinched a marble-sized boil. It broke with a squirt of pus in my fingers. That technique would be repeated several times a day for the rest of the record attempt. I needed to keep the infected area clean, so I'd wipe it down with alcohol pad several times per day. So now the fatigue and everything's kind of setting in. I'm getting kind of beat up, but I was still making pretty good time and heading across, counting it down across Kansas, across Illinois, but my feet were really getting pounded, and that's something that see, if you notice, we learned a lot about feet too, because shoes, when you're doing long distance riding, your shoes need to be big enough so they like when you tested your shoes, you should fit a pair of wool socks, heavy wool socks, because that's what about what your feet are going to swell up to after a few days. So I had hot foot, and I dealt with that. This is 1981. All these other races, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86. Finally, in 1987, I said, I got to do something different. So I took my, by this time they came out with clipless pedals that kind of just snap in like a ski binding. So I took my cleats, moved them back to the middle part of my shoe, and now I'm doing all this physical testing with Pete Pinsears getting ready, and we're doing ergometer tests and stuff. And there was no power change on the ergometers and stuff. I go, but my feet don't hurt. So now we're going out and doing these 400-mile training rides, no pain at all. And that's, again, learned the hard way. And so during the tandem transcontinental, never had a bit of foot problems. And that is finally some shoe manufacturer. It took a long time. I go to the bike shows, talk to the shoe manufacturers. Why don't you put double mounting holes and enough adjustability? So if you want to move your cleats up under your toes, you could. If you want to move them back to the arch of your foot, you can. So some shoes actually have more flexibility, but moving the cleats back for long distance cycling really helped a lot. Now, I'm riding about 18 hours a day or so, and we're counting it down. I'm thinking I'm kind of on schedule, and we're kind of calculating, are we going to make it, to New York City in time to break Marino's record? And so anyway, about halfway up the mountain, I had an emotional breakdown. This is the last night now. We're about 400 miles from New York City. And halfway up the mountain, this is West Virginia, I had an emotional breakdown while I was riding. I started crying. It was the first time during the whole record attempt I felt that way. I realized we were going to make it to New York City. We have been through so much the past 5,500 miles. I let my emotions out for the next 5 minutes. No one in the support vehicle knew what I was feeling. It was a private moment of jumbled emotions with positive and negative in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. So the next day, we then ride through towards Gettysburg and that way during the day, then into Allentown, Pennsylvania, and now it's midnight again, and we are supposed to be at the Holland Tunnel about 100 miles away, and we're supposed to be there by 6 in the morning. So I'm calculating, okay, 100 miles, 6 hours. Yeah, I think I can do it. So I'm riding down the New Jersey Turnpike towards the Holland Tunnel, and about 50 miles. Now it's like 3 in the morning, and about 50 miles to go. And they say, well, support crews up by calling the Holland Tunnel and said, okay, Lon's coming, he'll be here at 6. And they said, no, got to be here at 5. You got to be here in 2 hours. So then it turned into like this sprint. Unfortunately, downhill, calm night, 25 miles an hour, hammering to get to the Holland Tunnel. We roll up there, we're about 10 minutes late, but the crew had already been up there. They said, okay, so there's like 2 parallel paths, or maybe there's 4 tunnels, but 2 going this way, 2 going this way. But they have to close it down and pump all the fumes out. So even though I got there a little bit late, they shut the tunnel down, pumped out the fumes for like 10 minutes or something, and then let me go down. And here I am waiting to get clearance. The little sign right there says Holland Tunnel. And we go down, come up. That isn't the Empire State Building on the other side. That's actually a different building. But you come down, you come out, and come out the other side. And so I finished New York City Hall, 10 days, 23 hours, and had broken the cross-country record. And the round trip was in 24 days, 2 hours. So that broke the Victor Vincenzi's record. Now, right there, I'm actually smiling, but this is, again, a stage photo after a while. When I rolled in, I probably looked more like this. And I was dazed for a while. And get up to City Hall, there was actually an NBC television crew there, and they did a little bit of stuff with us. But then right away, security guards said, get out of here. You're not supposed to be parking here. You got to get away from City Hall and stuff. So anyway, I had some Now it's about 6 in the morning. We have to go back to Staten Island to Susan's aunt's house. So we drive back to her house. I go to bed, now it's 9 in the morning. By the time I get there, she says, we have a press conference at noon. You got to wake up again. So now, wake up after 3 hours. I go down and we do this press conference with the microphone. And this is my sponsor, one of my main sponsors, had a thing called teleconferencing, and where you could call in on a telephone and many people could hear you at the same time and talk. And that was breaking technology at the time. So anyway, all these reporters and people are calling in, but one of the guys that calls is John Marino. And he goes, congratulations on setting the transcontinental record. And I said, oh, that's really great. And he goes, next year we're going to have a race across the country with 4 guys. Would you like to do it? And without really thinking or talking into my crew, I said, sure. So I'd only been off the bike 6 hours and the crew was still wiped out. And they said, okay, now we know what we're going to be doing the next year. Well, Susan now was getting interested in cross-country riding too. So in June of 1982, now this is the next summer, she was going to set a women's transcontinental record. And at the time, the record, nobody had done it under 15 days. So she thought, oh, that's going to be an easy record. Well, it turned out a month before, a few weeks ahead of time, another woman had done it in 14 days. So now Susan had to kind of up her mileage stuff. And she started off actually doing a pretty good pace. She was actually on my cross-country pace. A lot of the same towns, a lot of those landmarks, that was our goal every day, to try to maintain my pace. She wasn't sleeping as much though. I was, sleeping 6 hours a night or so. She was only sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night. But eventually she crossed the country in 11 days, 16 hours. So that's what she ended up doing, set the women's record. A month later, then I was involved in the Great American Bike Race with myself, John Howard, Michael Shermer, and John Marino. And that was on ABC Wide World of Sports. If you ever remember those old programs, they're still on YouTube. If you dial up Great American Bike Race, it's like a 10-part series, complete with commercials. But that was on ABC Wide World of Sports. And there again, not really knowing what I'm getting myself into, that was probably the hardest race I'd ever done because there was no communication, no cell phones. You didn't know where anybody was. So once you got 50 miles apart, it was almost too far to go back and spy on people. So you really didn't know. We had a chase car. That's all I did the whole time, was drive back to see where people were. I was in the lead by about 100 miles, and I expanded on that a little bit every day. Eventually, finishing up at the Empire State Building in 9 days, 20 hours. So I had knocked off almost a full day of what I had done the previous year. John Howard was second. He came in. I'm finishing here somewhere around 7 or so in the morning. He came in around 11 o'clock at night, so maybe 14, 15 hours later. Michael Shermer came in the next morning, and then John Marino came in the next night. So at the time, we thought that was a really fast time. But there again, the expectations, every time you set a new record, it was like, oh, I guess you can go faster. And Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile running. It was like, oh, let's go faster. And people started, breaking those records all the time. So Susan and I were eventually married in 1983. We did a tandem record, one across the country, in 10 days, 20 hours. And then a few years later, I was still doing Race Across America at that time, got second place a few times. Susan won the 1985 race. We did the 86 tandem record. Then Pete Consears and I did the 1987 transcontinental record, which was 7 days, 14 hours. And that's probably the most perfect transcontinental we'd ever done. Everything really clicked, worked really well, diets and everything. Later that year, Susan and I, we had our daughter Rebecca. We had to kind of stop racing and do something a little more stable. So we started a touring company, and we started doing bicycle tours across the United States. And so we'd go from, like Seattle to Boston, San Diego to Charleston, Mexico to Canada, Florida to Maine, Route 66 tours, Chicago to Los Angeles. And we were doing 2 or 3 tours a year. Plus I was managing the Race Across America, doing races with them too. Well, in 1989, I went to Peru with my dad and my brother. My dad wanted to do a trip on the Amazon. So I went down there. I had a pretty busy schedule. It's like, well, do I really want to go down there? But it was in December, so we went down there. We did a trip on the Amazon River, which was really, really fascinating. I got to know a lot of people, crew members on the boat. They told me about going across Peru, and they said, well, nobody's ever ridden a bike across Peru. And I said, well, if there's a road there, I can try it. And he said, well, the road is really, really bad. I don't think you could do it. And I said, well, okay. So I went back down the next year with a mountain bike and started this ride across Peru. And it's really good adventure. Lonely Planet says, the tour book, Lonely Planet, they say, do not go there. There's drug traffic, tourists, stay away. Well, I didn't think I was much of a threat on a bike, so I continued to ride, pushing my bike through the jungle, going to a roadhouse about every 60 miles or so. It took me sunrise to sunset to go 60 miles. Eventually, I made my way through the jungle, and I went through this village, and the guy says, what are you doing out here on a bike? Nobody's ever ridden a bike on this road. You're the first person ever to ride across that, down to the boat docks where I could get on the Amazon boat. Took the Amazon boat down for another 400 miles down to a town of Iquitos. And I met some of the boat crew that I had met the year before. And they said, oh, yeah, we'll take you a tour. Here's some of the villages. And we went around. And there was a lot of work that could be done. So I started building stairs and building beds and doing stuff back in the area there. But you said, what we really need is a school. Can you help build a school? So the next year I went back, we raised a bunch of money. It's like, they said it'd be like $14,000. Well, we raised the money. Turns out it was more like $25,000, but went down there, built a school, and they had about 200 kids. Every year they added another 100 kids. And eventually it got bigger and bigger got to about 1,000 kids. So then it ended up being a rebuild, and the government actually came in and rebuilt this school. Now it had 1,000 kids, and that school is still up and running. And it was on the outskirts of town, but the town kept expanding, so now this school is actually almost back into town again. So it's got some support from the government, but we still help them out as much as we can. And we do other projects. We got them a water filter system. Then there was another school about 50 kilometers out of town, or another village. They wanted a school, so we went to help them, and we went further into the jungle. Now this is like 3 miles off the main highway, so just getting bags of cement and everything back into the school was a problem. But this is what their school was originally, and so we had to mill the wood, cut the wood, and bring the wood out of the jungle, eventually start building the school, and bring all the bricks. Everything had to be carried in. It's a lot smaller school. It only has about 75 or 80 kids in 4 classrooms. But that school's been up and running now for about 15 years. So as we started doing tours down to Peru, we would do these bike tours across the country. And then we started doing other projects. So this place, we built a road grader to grade a sand road. So that was one of the afternoon projects we actually helped build. And then we were doing these other riverboat trips all the time. Probably 10 times I went down the river. And we go to these back orphanages and stuff and deliver supplies and things. And there are a lot of homeless kids living in the streets down in Iquitos. So there's like 400,000 people there. But we take these kids and we have a big birthday party at a Chinese restaurant. and all the kids would come in there, and we'd have a big birthday party, and they'd get a new set of clothes and things. And so I continued to do trips down the Amazon, going to these back villages, delivering school books. And a lot of the villages would say, "Oh, what are you doing here? You know, no white person's ever stopped and saw us before." And so that was always good adventure doing those trips. And then as we started to go there, I was there several years, and I got to meet some of the racers and found out they were very active. They could use a lot of equipment, so we started bringing bicycles down, ride them on the tours, then give out the bikes later, and we'd all bring them 100 different jerseys and stuff, and we'd have these races and give out prizes. Now, some of the women I got to be good friends with, they actually came back to the United States, and they've raced at Kenosha and Northbrook Velodrome quite a bit. And we're also involved with the Pan American team. So we're still really involved with them almost every day. And then back around 2013, 2014, we started doing trips over to Ghana, Africa with Craig Calfee Carbon Bicycles. And using that same technology he uses for making a Calfee bike, we started making bamboo bikes. And so we did several tours again there. And we'd always meet up with the Ghana cycling team. There's usually about 6 riders or so from them, from their team that would tour with us on a big loop around about 400-mile loop. And there's a bunch of other kids that wanted to go with us, and they had to qualify by doing a race around the soccer field. And we took the 3 best riders, and they could go on a tour with us. And a lot of them were riding these bikes, metal pedals, they're riding with no shoes on. But they're pretty tough. And these three girls had won the race, and they started traveling with us. And we actually got to know them pretty well. We went back many years, and they rode across around Ghana with us. And we helped them set up businesses. One got her hairdresser shop. Another one we set up a sewing shop where she makes dresses and things. And then we also started helping out high schools, where we go to the backcountry and bring them 10 or 15 of these sewing machines, and the girls would, well, guys and girls, but mainly women girls were doing the sewing, and they'd sew school uniforms for like the junior high kids, and then sell them, and then the junior high kids would have uniforms. And then other schools, we started building a cafeteria, and they had about 800 students here. So we've been going to these schools and building and doing construction projects with them there also. And some of the students went on to the university. We helped them with their education, going to college. And then one of the weird things happened on one of our trips down the Amazon a few years ago. we got hijacked by a village, and they held us hostage. The whole boat, like 100 people. There's like 12 American kind of people in there. And they said the boat was polluting the river. They were having a big protest. They were going to take the boat over. So we were left stranded there. But while we were there for a few days, we got to talk to them. We said, "Well, what's your problem?" They said, "Oh, the boat's polluting the river. We need a better water source." I said, "Okay, well, let's think about this." Well, another boat from the Navy came, and they arranged it, and they came and picked up. Now, the boat was cram-packed with 100 people. They sent a smaller boat that held like 50 people that 100 people had to get on, and we still had another day and a half to go. But we all piled onto this boat and finished up. So we were packed in there pretty tight. But while we were with the village, we said, "Okay, we're going to come back and help you dig a water well." So I came back the next year with my friends from Peru, the town of Cunanico, which is it's about 200 miles from any big city. And we dug a water well and filters and things. And so now they have a water source. And this whole thing, they built a house that goes over the thing. But this is the testing of it when we first got it up and running. So those are all things that kind of happened by accident, really, but we're able to help them out. So things like that kind of kept happening. during every trip, there's always something. And as I would travel around Peru, I usually go to the most remote places I could find, sometimes by bicycle, sometimes by like a taxi tour going through the mountains. And this is people I met on this begging for food on the sidewalk, and I got to meet them. Turned out they were on the run from Venezuela, trying to get out of Venezuela, went into Peru, and were living on the streets and under a bridge. And so I took them out to dinner, got to know their story quite a bit. She was a manager at a cell phone company, and so she's been on the run for 6 weeks. And so they didn't really have much. So we went to a clothing store, bought them all new clothes, took them back to a hotel, got them a room and a shower and stuff. But those are some of the things that happen it happens all the time. It seems like I'm always meeting these people. But those have all been good adventures. And I think I get as much actually interest and satisfaction out of a bunch of these other projects we've done in Peru and in Africa as we did about riding across the country. A lot of the things we have done down there is pretty much anonymous. We don't put our name on too much of it, because then people are always asking us for money, and they think that if we support a project, then the government thinks they have support, and then the government won't support them. So we kind of help them under the table a little bit, so the government will still keep chipping in some. But those have all been good adventures for me, and a lot of it's covered in the book. I haven't had time to go into all those stories, but the book's kind of filled with how one thing led to another as over the last 50 years. So thank you. Do we have some time, question and answers?
Sure, yeah.
A little bit?
Yeah. Any questions?
I know we're supposed to kind of wrap it up here. So.
We're good, no worries.
Yes.
I wonder what's the knowledge on your tires? How often would you change your tires on your double cross-country trip?
Well, we were sponsored by Specialized, and Specialized was just, nobody knew about Specialized really at the time, so we were doing these tires by them. And a lot of the tires would get cut up and nicked on the interstates. So the little interstate wires and stuff that were from tire treads that blow up. So we ended up changing tires, the crew would about every 500 miles. Tire wasn't worn out, but we just changed them a lot. They gave us a bunch of tires. And remember the old Specialized tire, they had that center tread. And that really isn't very efficient. That's not good. That's squirmy and whatever. So anyway, what I would do on my racing bikes, I would wear that off and make it just about ready to show the tire cords. And that's when the tire was the fastest, as Avocet showed later on when they had the ball tire. So anyway, it was an evolution. Specialized learned a lot, and we learned a lot too.
So you ended up riding all 3 bikes in a day?
We usually had a day bike and a night bike. On the races later on, we have day bikes, night bikes, spare bikes, and a lot of times we'd switch them around just to change the saddle and the position. Every one was 1/8 of an inch different, and that actually helped get you in a little different position. Question?
So, just thinking of the financial logistics, you obviously weren't making a lot of money at the time. This is all sponsored, the first round?
And we were able to pull it off on a shoestring. That's where a lot of it, why it worked. And nowadays, here these RAM budgets are spending $20,000, $50,000. I mean, we were doing it $5,000 cash, and so we were doing it on a shoestring. And I wasn't making much money. I was working $5 an hour in a bike shop, so I didn't have much money. So that's why I look back on it and go, the chances of ever pulling that off again. We had some people make donations. City of Harvard, they had a fundraiser. I had a good friend who was a member of Rotary and stuff, and so they brought in several $1,000s here and there. So that's kind of how we pulled it off. And it wasn't, I was really stupid about money. I'm just riding a bike. and that's how I kind of went into the whole thing. And even after it was over with, I was ready to start doing more races. But, once I started racing more professionally, we ended up with sponsors. I had a $5,000 Brooks saddle sponsor, a $5,000 tire sponsor, a clothing sponsor. So I probably had $25,000 in sponsorships, but I still had to put the race on for that, for half of that. So we spent half, kept half. So my annual, I look at my Social Security statement, my income that year was $10,000 or something. So, yeah, we one of the years we were sponsored by McDonald's, but that basically paid for our races. Susan raced Ram, I raced Ram, and we did a tandem record. So we did three races that year for $50,000. So that didn't leave a lot of extra income those years. Any other questions? Yes.
When you're riding, 200 miles a day, what do you think about?
Well, as I explained in the book, to the outside observer, it looks like nothing's going on. But when you're in the zone, that's what you're thinking about. When I was riding with Pete, we knew that route really well. I'd been over it like 7 times. And I knew from this grain elevator to that grain elevator, we would time it. And it's like, okay, that's 11 miles. Can we knock that off in a half an hour at 22 miles an hour? And so every 10 miles, we had a new goal. And we just kept doing that over and over and over again all the way across the country. The crew was always frantic. There was always something going on with the crew. And the example I give in the book is like, if you're looking at the Oregon Trail wagon going across Nebraska, it looks really boring. But when you read the accounts and the diaries from the Oregon trails, it's actually pretty interesting, all the stuff that was happening to them every day. Same way watching somebody climb Mount Everest, looking at them with binoculars, they're not going very fast. That's pretty boring up there. Well, when you're hanging on the side of the cliff, it's pretty exciting. So that's kind of how it was for us racing. When you're in the zone, that's why I didn't even like listening to music off the speakers or in the headphones or anything, because I always was mentally calculating, these time splits. And when I finished a race, a lot of times I was mentally exhausted. I was like, I didn't want to do anything. I couldn't concentrate on anything. So, because I kind of wiped out mentally.
You bike now?
Pardon?
Do you bike now?
Well, we have the touring business, so we're still doing that. So we're still on the road 100 days a year with the touring business. So, the way we work it, we have crew rides half a day, half time, work half time. So I can ride half the time usually, which is enough. I'm not doing any 24-hour events. Any other questions? Yes.
What are your thoughts on electric bikes?
An electric?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a place for them. I think it's filled a niche. You get to be in your 60s and 70s, and it's actually a good way to keep people on the bikes. So as far as it's better to have the e-bikes out there on the road and stuff. It's a bigger lobbying group for cycling than to have a lot of people not riding. So from that standpoint, even on our tours, we suggest people bring an e-bike. The limiting factor on some of our tours that are over 100 miles a day is battery life. And so we're kind of logistically dealing with that. How do you get people through a 100-mile day in a headwind, without burning up all the batteries? Because people say, we'll stash them in the lunch truck or whatever. Well, sometimes they can't even make it to lunch. You can't even make it 60 miles. And so anyway, but I think electric bikes are fine.
And there are people who really can't handle, just riding a regular bike. Like I have a friend who has breast cancer and she got an e-bike so that she could be on the bike,
Right. Well, my wife Susan, she's on her e-bike now, and she, I'm not on an e-bike yet, but I can see today. People say, well, you know, are you still riding as hard? I said, I just ride as hard as I ever did. I only go half as fast. So, so my perception is that I'm doing a good job. The speedometer, and I look at the distance, I go, oh gee, 100 miles is a long way. Well, my cousin Carolyn actually has some books for sale if anybody wants them. The posters are free, the postcards are free, so if you want to take,
The books are $20.
the books are $20, yeah. So if you want me to sign any of that, I'm going to be around here too for a while. So-
Lon, thank you so much.
I didn't think I could stand it.